Hello and welcome to the third in the series of conversations we're having on constitutional governance in Sri Lanka. We have with us again Dr. Asanga Welikala, the Director of the Edinburgh Centre for Constitutional Law. Dr. Welikala, I'd like to talk to you today about the new constitution, a new constitution for Sri Lanka. What would a new constitution for Sri Lanka look like? On that subject, what are the main goals of constitution making in Sri Lanka in the context of serious economic and political challenges facing the country now?
Absolutely. So first of all, we have to agree that we need a new constitution. The past several parliaments have been amending the constitution, 17th, 18th, 19th, 20th, just going, tinkering here and there with presidential powers, with the Constitutional Council, with the independent. None of this is going to work, right? Because we are not attacking the problem at its root.
Right.
We have to recalibrate, we have to establish a new social contract, a social covenant between the people of Sri Lanka and the state. And we have to reshape the state in such a way that it begins to work in our interests rather than in the interests of vested interests that can capture and control the state. Right? So we definitely do need to understand that in principle, what is the main constitutional challenge facing, that we need a new constitution in order to, if we are serious about changing things in this country. So even these recent attempts by the new government, the cabinet has just approved a new constitutional amendment, which apparently does some things with the Constitutional Council and reduces presidential powers. It's not going to work because we have done this over and over in the past, and we know what it has led to, right? The 19th Amendment was supposed to deal with this issue, right? It did not. It led to a complete breakdown between the relationship between the Prime Minister and the President, leading to the disaster of Easter Sunday. 20th Amendment was then taking the swing back the other way. We ended up with an unprecedented economic catastrophe. So we have to understand that this tinkering with this presidential constitution, this 1978 constitution that we have been doing, can be empirically shown to be not working. Right? So that is why we would need to argue, and we need to understand that we need a whole new constitution that will, as I said earlier, provide a new social contract for us. And that contract has to be about a constitution that delivers accountability, that delivers checks and balances, the separation of powers, and then ultimately through all those mechanisms starts working for the common good.
Right. So let's talk about some of the values that should underpin a new constitution. You touched on this before, and values are not a conversation that is in the public sphere at all. So what sort of values should underpin this new constitution?
Exactly. I think democratic values, right? And that means there are a whole series, you can give a shopping list of stuff, right? Integrity, responsiveness, inclusion, all of those things. But to me, there are two things that you can categorize everything under.
Right.
First is, insofar as the structure of government that we want to establish through a new constitution is concerned, the cardinal value has to be accountability, right? That is what we should, that is the underlying principle that should inform any structure of government that we design in the future, new constitution. And the other thing is that the whole constitutional state has to be ordered around the common good. Right, the common good in this sense, there are various definitions of this. It's an old idea in political philosophy and thought. It is talked about in the Christian tradition, in the old Aristotelian tradition, but also, of course, in the much more Asian traditions of political philosophy, Buddhism, Hinduism, and so on. So we have all these things in our society. Right. So we can draw on all of those things, and we have to devise our own idea of what the common good is. But at very base, for me, it simply means that the whole state and all of its institutions have to be ordered towards ensuring that government happens in the interests of the people of Sri Lanka. And even the 78 Constitution pretends to do that, but it does not. We know, because the structure that it sets up incentivizes different kinds of behavior, and it does not work for the common good.
Right.
So we have to be very conscious of that. So in terms of values, that means that we have to ensure that Sri Lankans as individuals are treated with respect. Our ethnic and plural communities are treated with equality and respect. that we include rather than exclude, that the state works for the people rather than extracts from the people, that various kinds of financial and political elites cannot capture the state and start, do all sorts of things with it, robbing the people, dry the people of Sri Lanka. And overall, that we have provisions very specifically for ensuring that our natural environment is respected for future generations.
Right.
And that the common good also means a contract in time. Okay. That present generations make decisions in such ways that we don't ruin the futures of our children.
Right.
All of these are elements of a common good ordered constitution. And those are the key values. Accountability and the common good are the key values that should underpin a new constitution.
Right. And what do you think the main institutional features of a new constitution should be? So,
abolition of the executive presidential system means that we return to a parliamentary form of government. So that's the big change. Right. We need to have we need to restructure parliament. Right. Parliament has to. So when you take the attention away from this almighty executive presidential system and power returns, parliament becomes the sort of main forum of political action in the country. We have forgotten what parliament is, because parliament has been for so long just so irrelevant in this country, right? So we need to relearn ways of making parliament work as a parliament of representative democracy. We need to empower the judiciary to do its job much better. So those are the sort of main institutional structures, but I can go into all of these details further.
No, so these are the key main institutional features, the key changes that have to happen for a new constitution, if we can make that happen. And can you explain how the executive power works or would work in such a
constitution? Absolutely. So how does a parliamentary executive or a cabinet executive work? So the Prime Minister and the cabinet, who are appointed on the basis of enjoying the confidence of Parliament, becomes the main instrument of policy making and policy implementation of the government. Right. The president will become a ceremonial figure, right? Who is the head of state, but will have sort of titular titles like commander-in-chief and things like that, maybe even symbol of national unity or other things that we can think about. The president has to become somebody who is above politics, who can represent the nation as a whole, all our peoples, right? All our communities, be able to embody the idea of the Republic of Sri Lanka to the outside world, right? Those are ceremonial things, but very important things, right? It's a software of power, right? It's the way, and you need to have, like, think of presidents like the President of India or the President of the Republic of Ireland. These are hugely distinguished people in the arts and so on, or in the sciences or academics and so on, who become presidents, who have a very sound understanding of what constitutional government in a republic means, and it's there to advise, warn, and also sort of in that way keep the cabinet somewhat in line, but not in a soft way rather than in a hard way. Right? But the main instrument of political executive power becomes the cabinet and the Prime Minister. But remember also the other very important dimension within the executive of such a parliamentary republic would be an independent, professional and competent and uncorrupt civil service. Right. So we need to sort of think very clearly and very seriously about how you reform the public service. And our problem here is not so much that we don't have good people in Sri Lanka who are in the public service. There are excellent people. But what has happened is politicization, which affects their professionalism and which affects their impartiality and their independence. So we have to establish in such a way that the public service becomes something that is much smaller but much more fit for purpose and therefore much more effective. We also need to think of a senior civil service, an elite cadre of highly professional, highly experienced, very well paid people who are qualified to take over the secretaryships of ministries, for example, become ambassadors, the diplomatic service and so on, at the senior level. So the public service has to be structured in two tiers, with this very Singapore-style, professional, highly paid, comparable to anything that the best of the private sector can offer. Right? We need to attract that kind of people too. We need to invest in their education outside, in Harvard and Oxford and Cambridge, and bring them back. So we need to sort of reinstitute that elite cadre.
Really elevate the public.
Really elevate that. But we need to, because the public service has become over-politicized on the one hand and bloated on the other, right? We have proportionate to our population, simply because of the fact that public service has become an instrument of political patronage.
Correct.
All that has to stop.
Yeah.
It'll be painful for the people of Sri Lanka at the end of the day. You're right. There are lots of people think that I will vote for my guy in my village. He will give me a job in the public sector.
Yeah.
All that has to change.
Yeah.
So the executive will be led in that sense. So just to recap, a president of the republic who is a ceremonial president, but who may have one or two other things to do in checking the prime minister and the cabinet, but the cabinet becomes the main instrument of the direction of control of the government. The prime minister and the cabinet are selected on the basis of them having the confidence of parliament. Usually that is expressed through having a majority in parliament. And then this very important structure of an independent civil service.
Right, and how would you envision the parliament to be structured?
Yeah, we need to do two things. One is we need to establish a bicameral parliament. That is to say, parliament of two houses, not a single house. Let's call it the House of Representatives and the Senate, just using familiar terms from an older constitution, the Independence Constitution. We can call them other things if you want. But essentially a lower chamber and an upper chamber. The lower chamber has to perform the function of providing democratic legitimacy, because it is in the lower chamber, it is from the lower chamber that the confidence that is necessary for the formation of the cabinet is found, right?
Okay.
So the lower chamber has to be directly elected. And its job is to also, of course, scrutinize, oversee the executive. It will have its committees doing all of those kinds of things, but its primary function is to provide the confidence for the maintenance of the government. The moment the government loses the confidence in the lower chamber, it's dismissed. Right? So if, for example, we have the government elected with a particular mandate to do certain things in 2019, by 2021 we see the whole thing going pear-shaped. We have the parliament has then the opportunity to withdraw confidence of the government. The prime minister is dismissed. You either form a new government from the existing parties, or you have a general election. Right? You can't have a president who is taking us down the chasm, and we see this happening in slow motion, and he takes us into the abyss, and after that you can't even get rid of it. Right? So that all that kind of thing goes, where we provide enough power for the prime minister and the cabinet to do effective, efficient government. Obviously, we don't need to, we can't have a situation where a government has no power whatsoever. The government has to be able to carry out a policy mandate that is elected to do, and that is provided in a parliamentary system. But a parliamentary system is also better than a presidential system, because a bad executive can be very swiftly gotten rid of.
Right.
So that's the lower chamber's role. The upper chamber performs two different functions. One is to act as a brake on the lower chamber. The lower chamber is dominated by the government. Prime Minister will usually have the majority at his command. But the upper chamber has to be constituted in such a way that we bring in independents, experts into the policy making process. People who just generally don't want to get involved in the business of getting, in electoral politics, but who have a central role to add to legislation, right? Making the quality of legislation better. So its role is to scrutinize, to stop over hasty action, right, by the lower chamber, force reconsideration of over hasty measures, all of that, and that can only happen if we have the representation of expertise, right, in that. So that's a very important function. The other important function that we must do with the second chamber in a future constitution in this country is to get the representation of the provinces into this. Right? So there are different ways of constituting that, but the essential principle is that we've devolved further powers to the provinces and ensure that they can function, right? Not to just fill second-rate or loser politicians that as it happens now, and they can't really do much except spend even more public money. That's the white elephant argument about the provincial councils these days. The answer is not to abolish them, but to give them further sufficient powers to be able to do the job that they're elected to do, and they perform a very important job there.
Yeah.
But what we must also do, if we further devolve power, is to bring all of that back, because we need to ensure a common good oriented constitution has to work for the entire
Correct.
thing, right?
Yeah.
If we give too much power to certain provinces and they start working in their own interests and not in the national interest, then that doesn't work, right? So the one way of doing that is to ensure that they also have a say in the national legislature
Right.
through the second chamber. The third thing about the legislature that I will mention is that we need to change our electoral system. The current system, which we have a proportional representation system, that is good in certain ways, because it certainly allows for the greater representation, better representation of ethnic and religious minorities, and that's a good principle. We must preserve that. But what we must also realize about proportional representation and our way of doing proportional representation, because not everywhere where this exists does this happen, but we also see the extreme fragmentation of parties, right? We have basically, we are in a state of complete dissolution of the traditional parties and the factionalization, fragmentation, not a good thing. We see hyper competition leading to elections becoming very, very expensive, right? And only very few, people can actually get into politics, because you need to spend millions, right, in the system, right, to get elected. What does that do? That spawns corruption,
Correct.
right? Because it's a life and death thing. If you're putting that kind of money into it, right, you've got to win, right? And then that becomes a hyper competitive system, and we see elections becoming more violent. Breeds corruption, right? Because that kind of money, not everybody has to spend on their own, so they have to get sponsors and all the rest of it. And the kind of people who invest in that kind of thing then expect something in return from the guy who is elected, right? So it has totally sort of exploded our corruption problem. So for all these reasons, we need to reform that.
Right.
And we need to move to what is called a MMP system, a mixed member proportional system, or a mixed system generally. That system will have small territorial constituencies elected on the first past the post system, and on the basis of that performance, there are various mathematical calculations. There is a top-up component on proportional representation, right? So it has the benefit, right, of first past the post in, for example, the improving the relationship between your MP and yourself. Right. There will be an MP, who is your MP, in a way that we don't know under PR.
Right.
And by making constituencies smaller, you also reduce the costs of electioneering, so you can encourage more people to sort of join the political process. So the FPP element, the first past the post element, encourages that. But we also keep the proportional representation element in a way that delivers justice and to the requirements of pluralism in this country, because we need to absolutely ensure that Parliament just simply does not become simply a singular Buddhist majority chamber, right? It has to represent all of our people.
Correct.
So that is the element of the proportional representation. So there are various ways of designing that system. It's a difficult task, but it's a necessary task. So Parliament, bicameralism, two chambers, effective, and then we need to think about in Parliament how all together it can then work to deliver the requirements of accountability, and particularly to keep the government in check.
Right. What other significant elements of the kind of constitution do you propose that you'd like to highlight?
Yes, I think in addition to those big changes that I mentioned, right, the abolition of presidentialism, going back to parliamentary thing, a bicameral parliament, we need to improve our system of devolution, right? What we have now is neither here nor there, right? It doesn't deliver the requirements of devolution, neither have we on that basis abolished it. They're just there doing a different purpose, which is usually to be a further taxpayer funded layer of government that is there for patronage. Not a good idea. We need to rethink devolution in such a way that it genuinely becomes a layer of government that actually can govern for the province that it is elected, right? So there's a purpose for it. The expenditure that we spend on that layer must be justified by the fact that it is there to do that job. it also serves the purpose, right? So, as I mentioned there earlier, in the ways that a parliamentary system of government based on the separation of powers delivers better on the requirements of accountability. The other way that you can think of accountability being improved is that the central government then also has competitors, right? Territorially, right? It's not it doesn't have the sole say. We have over-centralized everything. Provincial councils have lost the rationale for which they are there, so we must restore that. And it is not simply because of the fact that we need to answer to the aspirations of the North and East. It is also there to look after the poorer provinces, for example. And in all my experience, whenever we talk to any provincial level chief minister or official secretary to a provincial council or whoever it might be, they actually understand devolution very well, and they know what the defects of this problem are, right? Of this particular structure, 13th Amendment structure are, and it's very easy to fix it, and we can do all of that. So improving devolution is a very important dimension of all of this. I would mention then the fourth pillar, what is known as the fourth pillar. We already have some of that stuff, and we need to just improve that. And these are the independent commissions, right? Very, very important to ensure the public service of bribery and corruption, judicial service commission, all of these independent commissions that we have. We probably need to add an audit service commission and things like that. Important. And then we have to improve the constitutional council appointments framework. Those are all things that we have to put in. Several other things. We need a better economic governance structure, right? We need to empower a government which is elected on a particular policy platform, a particular ideology, whether that is a socialist one, whether that's a liberal one, or a capitalist one, whatever it might be. But that's for the people to decide periodically, given the attraction of the platform that a party offers at an election.
Right.
Yet at the same time, we have to ensure that whatever the policy platform that the government of the day is enacting has to be nonetheless done in a way that is transparent and proper, right? So we need to have a much more structured system of economic governance, that whatever decision making that happens in the government has to happen properly. There has to be, for example, a separate finance minister. The prime minister can't take the finance ministry, right? That's one of the problems that we have. We need to have the central bank governor and the monetary board appointed in a transparent and independent way, not the crony of the president or the prime minister or whoever it might be. In all of these ways we can improve. We probably need to introduce something like a national economic council. Once again, a consultative advisory body that will bring in the best of our economic brains, right? Both here and abroad, in the Sri Lankan diaspora. We have brilliant economic thinkers in this country who have no say whatsoever and are not listened to at all. But through this council, you can bring that in. And the government may or may not listen to what they're saying. But if they're not listening, a member of the council can publicly say, look, this was the proposal of the government, this is the reasons why I said this is not a good idea, and I'm saying this to you. So that way we are, disseminating more information. This asymmetry of information that we have, in economic policy making, where it's the Treasury, the central bank, the Ministry of Finance, the central bank, and some members of the cabinet. If all the information is held there, so a National Economic Council will help, as would an independent Office of Budget Responsibility and an independent Statistics Office of National Statistics. So that Parliament as well as the general public have a much greater awareness of the economic facts, right, and the financial facts or public financial facts. So all of these things are important. The other major area that we need to improve, in fact build from the very beginning, because we have nothing there, as the Easter Sunday tragedy demonstrated, is to have a new National Security Council on a proper footing, not just meeting that the president convenes. We don't know, there is no structure there, what is the procedure, what is happening, who's doing what. Naturally, certain matters of national security require a degree of secrecy, we understand that. But we need to have a structure properly for that. So the a new national security architecture has to be there in a new constitution. So the final innovation I think we probably need is a council of state. The council of state can be chaired by the president. It can have certain ex officio members like the prime minister and key ministers like foreign affairs, defense, and so on, finance. But it also must have a majority of eminent Sri Lankans in it, right? People who know industry and business, the financial world, academics, lawyers, media people, in culture, arts, and media. All sorts of ways in which our whole national public cultural life is constituted, right? That we bring these people together in a council of state, presided over by the ceremonial president, right? And they're there as sort of wise men and women to counsel and to offer their expertise. Former diplomats, people with all of these kinds of things. Now, this might seem like, well, what's the point? You know, you just have this talking shop and they'll come and say something and go and all the rest of it. But in the places where it works really well, places like the Republic of Ireland or Malta and all these places, it's a fantastic instrument of soft power. Okay. So, in Sri Lanka, we have government doing something, then we have something called civil society, which is in Sri Lanka shorthand for the NGOs. Shouting and criticizing, right? And never the twain shall meet, right? The Council of State is a way of bringing all this together so that independent, eminent people who have useful things to say about our life, and it's not only to do with hard policy matters of economic policy or anything like that, but also softer cultural stuff.
So influence towards the common good. That's right.
So that we have, it's a signification that beyond politics there is a life, and that those people have a role in the state. And on the other hand, if used well, the political executive can gain a hell of a lot from these people, right?
Right. Thank you, Dr. Welikala. That was very educational and very enlightening, and I hope I think you've captured very clearly the key changes and key instruments that need to be changed in a new constitution. Thank you again for your time.
Thank you.